August 15, 1971, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. President Richard Nixon appears on television screens across America. He looks directly into the camera and announces he is closing the gold window. Foreign governments can no longer exchange their dollars for American gold. The promise that has anchored the global economy for 27 years is broken. Just like that. No warning, no negotiation, no permission asked. Within hours, the news reaches every capital on Earth. The Bretton Woods system, the financial architecture that rebuilt the world after World War II, is dead. And the money in your pocket just became something it has never been before. Pure faith. Nothing backing it except trust. But here is what makes this different. This is not a collapse. This is not a crisis forced upon America. This is a choice. A calculated decision made over one secret weekend at Camp David, by a small group of men who understood they were changing the rules of money forever. How did we get here? Why did Nixon really do it? And why are we living in the world he created, watching the exact same tensions play out right now with China, with debt, with the dollar itself? This is the story of the day money became belief. By the end you will understand the hidden forces that killed the gold standard, see why every dollar crisis since 1971 follows the same pattern, and recognize the warning signs that the system Nixon created might be reaching its breaking point. This is not just history, this is the foundation of every economic reality you live in today. It is spring 1945. The world is in ruins. Europe is rubble. Japan is ash. 50 million people are dead. And the victorious Allied powers gather in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods to answer one question. How do we make sure this never happens again? They believe they know the answer. The chaos between the wars, the competitive currency devaluations, the trade wars, the economic nationalism, all of it contributed to the rise of fascism and the march to war. So they design a new system, a system of rules, a system of cooperation, a system that will bind nations together through money. The Bretton Woods Agreement creates something unprecedented in human history, a truly global monetary system with the US dollar at its center. Here is how it works. The United States promises to exchange dollars for gold at a fixed price of $35 per ounce. Every other country pegs its currency to the dollar at a fixed exchange rate. Japan sets the yen at 360 to $1. Britain sets the pound at $2.80. France, Germany, Italy, all of them lock their currencies to the dollar. And because the dollar is as good as gold, because you can always exchange it for the actual metal, the whole system has an anchor, something real, something solid, something that cannot be printed or inflated away. For the first time since before World War I, international trade has a stable foundation, and it works brilliantly. Through the late 1940s and 1950s, the system fuels the most remarkable economic boom in human history. Europe rebuilds. Japan transforms from ruins to an economic powerhouse. America prospers beyond imagination. The dollar becomes the global currency. Central banks around the world hold dollars as reserves. International trade is conducted in dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. The United States has created something no empire in history ever achieved. A currency that everyone wants. A currency that everyone trusts. A currency backed by the promise of gold. But beneath this gleaming surface, a contradiction is growing. A mathematical impossibility that nobody wants to acknowledge. The economist Robert Triffin sees it first. He explains the problem simply. The world needs more dollars to fuel growing trade. But the more dollars America creates, the less gold it has to back them. At some point, the math breaks down. Either the world runs out of dollars and trade grinds to a halt, or America creates too many dollars and the gold backing becomes a fiction. This becomes known as the Triffin dilemma. And in 1960, as the contradiction becomes visible, nobody has a solution. Meet John F. Kennedy. He takes office in January 1961 and immediately faces a problem his predecessor left him. The United States is losing gold. Not slowly, fast. Foreign central banks are starting to notice something. America is creating a lot of dollars, spending on foreign aid, spending on military bases across the globe, spending to fight the Cold War, spending on imports as Europe and Japan recover and start exporting goods. All those dollars are piling up in foreign central banks. And those central banks are doing the math. They see the US gold reserves, they see the dollars in circulation, they realize there is not enough gold to cover all the dollars, so they start asking for redemptions, they start exchanging dollars for gold, and the US gold stock starts to fall. In 1950, the United States held over 20,000 tons of gold, more than half of all the monetary gold in the world. By 1960, it is down to 16,000 tons, and it is still falling. Kennedy tries everything. He creates restrictions on American investment overseas. He limits lending to foreigners. He cajoles European allies to hold more dollars and take less gold. He creates currency swap lines with the Federal Reserve to provide temporary support. Nothing works. The fundamental problem remains. The world needs dollars. But every dollar created weakens the gold backing. And the more the backing weakens, the more countries want to exchange their dollars for gold before it is too late. It is a slow-motion bank run, and Kennedy knows it. But Lyndon Johnson makes it worse. Much worse. He becomes president in November 1963 with grand ambitions. The Great Society, Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty, massive domestic spending programs, and simultaneously, the Vietnam War. Hundreds of thousands of troops, billions of dollars in military spending. Johnson wants both guns and butter. He wants to build a welfare state and fight a war at the same time, and he does not want to raise taxes to pay for it. So he prints money, not literally. But the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates low, credit expands, the money supply grows, inflation starts to creep up, and all those new dollars flow overseas. By 1968, the situation is critical. The London Gold Pool, an agreement between 8 central banks to keep the gold price stable at $35 per ounce, collapses in March. Private speculators are buying so much gold that the central banks cannot hold the price down. The pool dissolves. A two-tier gold market emerges. Official transactions still happen at $35 per ounce, but private market gold is trading higher. Everyone can see the writing on the wall. The dollar is overvalued. There is not enough gold. The promise cannot be kept forever. France is the most aggressive. President Charles de Gaulle does not trust the dollar. He does not trust American power. He sees the Vietnam War as imperial overreach. He sees American inflation as theft. Every dollar that loses value steals wealth from countries holding those dollars as reserves. So France demands gold. Lots of gold. French ships literally sail to New York to pick up gold bars and bring them back to Paris. De Gaulle is calling America's bluff, and America cannot call him out because he is right. Then there is West Germany. By 1970, Germany is an export powerhouse. German goods flood into America. Americans buy Volkswagens and BMW cars and German machinery. Dollars flow to Germany. The Bundesbank accumulates enormous dollar reserves. Under Bretton Woods rules, Germany is supposed to use those dollars to buy German marks to maintain the fixed exchange rate, but that means printing more marks, which means inflation in Germany. The Germans hate inflation. They remember Weimar. They remember wheelbarrows of worthless paper money. They do not want to import American inflation, so they face a choice. Keep the fixed exchange rate and accept inflation, or break the peg and let the mark appreciate. In May 1971, Germany chooses. They stop supporting the dollar. The mark starts to float upward. Other countries follow. The Bretton Woods system is cracking. And then there is Britain. On August 11, 1971, the British Treasury makes a request. They want the United States to convert $3 billion of their reserves to gold, or at least to provide cover for those reserves. Nobody in the Nixon administration is quite sure what cover means. But the message is clear. Britain does not trust the dollar anymore. Britain wants out. If Britain, America's closest ally, is running for the exits, everyone will run. This is the bank run scenario. This is the nightmare. Richard Nixon has been president since January 1969. He does not really understand international monetary policy. He admits this. Economics bores him. He cares about politics, about China, about the Soviet Union, about Vietnam, about getting re-elected in 1972. But he understands one thing very clearly. The current system is not working. American gold is draining away. Inflation is rising. Unemployment is rising at the same time. This should not be possible, but it is happening. Stagflation, and his political opponents are blaming him. He needs to do something dramatic, something bold, something that looks like strength, not weakness. Enter John Connally. Nixon appoints him Treasury Secretary in February 1971. Connally is a former Texas governor, tall, handsome, charismatic. He has no background in international finance. He does not care. He sees the world in simple terms. America is strong. America should act strong. If other countries do not like it, too bad. His motto, according to people who work with him, is essentially this: foreigners are screwing us, let us screw them first. Connally does not want to save Bretton Woods. He wants to use its collapse as leverage. Force other countries, especially Germany and Japan, to revalue their currencies, make their goods more expensive, make American goods more competitive, fix the trade deficit, and do it on America's terms. Working under Connolly is Paul Volcker. He is Undersecretary of Treasury for International Monetary Affairs. Tall, serious, brilliant. He has spent his entire career trying to save the Bretton Woods system. He understands the complexity. He knows the international implications. He believes in cooperation, in multilateral institutions, in preserving America's credibility with its allies. Volcker has been preparing contingency plans for months, plans to close the gold window, plans to negotiate a new system of fixed exchange rates with different parities, plans to manage the crisis carefully, diplomatically, cooperatively. His plans sit in a drawer, waiting for the right moment. Then there is Arthur Burns. He is chairman of the Federal Reserve, an economist, a mentor to Nixon from years ago. Burns also wants to preserve fixed exchange rates. He believes floating currencies will create chaos. He also believes in wage and price controls to fight inflation. But Burns has a problem. He wants the Federal Reserve to be independent. He also desperately wants to maintain his friendship with Nixon. He cannot do both. And when forced to choose, he chooses the friendship. George Shultz is director of the Office of Management and Budget, a true conservative, an economist from the University of Chicago. He hates wage and price controls. He thinks they are terrible policy. He wants floating exchange rates. Let the market decide currency values. Get the government out of the business of trying to maintain fixed parities. But he also knows Nixon. Nixon does not care about free market principles. Nixon cares about what plays well politically, and Shultz will have to go along. Then there is Pete Peterson, assistant to the president for international economic affairs. A businessman from Bell & Howell, smart, far-thinking, understands the big picture. He sees the crisis coming. He prepares detailed studies about the international monetary system, about what changes might mean. But in the end, policy gets made by Nixon and Connolly, not by study groups. On Friday, August 13, 1971, Nixon boards Marine One at the White House. His chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, organized this meeting one day before. He told everyone not to tell anyone where they are going, not their families, not their colleagues, nobody. When they arrive at Camp David, they are ordered not to make phone calls outside. This is secret. This is big. The meeting starts at 3:15 p.m. Nixon, Connolly, Volcker, Burns, Shultz, Peterson, and a few others. They gather in the Aspen Lodge. They have until Sunday night to make a decision that will change the global economy. Connolly leads the discussion. He lays out the situation bluntly. The gold drain is unsustainable. Britain is asking for cover. Other countries will follow. The United States will face a humiliating run on Fort Knox. They need to act first. Close the gold window before they are forced to close it. Burns objects. He worries about credibility. America made a promise. Breaking that promise will damage trust with allies. It might damage Cold War alliances. How can European countries trust American security guarantees if America breaks its financial promises? Volcker agrees with Burns about the diplomatic risks. But he also sees the math. There is no way to maintain the current system. Maybe they can close the gold window temporarily. Maybe they can negotiate a new system of fixed exchange rates with a cheaper dollar, a stronger yen and mark, then reopen the gold window at a new price. Keep the basic structure of Bretton Woods, but adjust the numbers. Connolly dismisses these concerns. He does not care about allied feelings. He wants to use the crisis as a weapon, force the surplus countries to revalue, hit them with a 10% import surcharge. Tell them the surcharge stays until they cooperate. Negotiate from strength, not weakness. Shultz supports closing the gold window, but he opposes what Connolly wants to do next. Connolly wants wage and price controls, a 90-day freeze on all wages and prices in America. Shultz hates this idea. It goes against every economic principle he believes in. Price controls do not work. They create shortages, they distort markets. They make inflation worse in the long run, but Connolly is thinking politically, not economically. Nixon has to announce this on television. He has to look strong. Closing the gold window sounds like weakness, admitting defeat, but if he combines it with wage and price controls, with tax cuts, with import surcharges, it looks like decisive action. It looks like taking charge. The American public will love it. And in August 1971, with an election coming in November 1972, Nixon cares more about the American public than he cares about economic theory. The discussion goes on for hours into Friday night, all day Saturday, Saturday night. Sunday morning, Volcker watches his carefully prepared contingency plans get taken apart, the nuance removed, the diplomacy stripped out. This is not going to be a careful negotiation. This is going to be a unilateral announcement, a shock. Connolly literally grabs papers out of Volcker's hands at one point. He does not want studies, he wants action. Burns tries to argue for preserving some version of fixed rates. He fails. Nixon is convinced by Connolly's approach. Make it bold. Make it look strong. Let other countries worry about their own problems. By Sunday afternoon, the decision is made. Sunday, August 15, 1971, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Nixon goes on live television. He does not lead with the gold window. He leads with domestic policy. He announces a 90-day freeze on all wages and prices. He announces tax cuts. He announces the 10% import surcharge. He frames it as creating a new prosperity without war. Only then, midway through the speech, does he mention gold. He says the United States is suspending temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. Temporarily. That word is important. He says it is temporary. He says once they negotiate a new system with fairer exchange rates, they will restore convertibility. He never uses the word permanently. He never says the gold standard is dead. But everyone who understands monetary policy knows the truth. The gold window will never reopen. The Bretton Woods system is finished. Temporary means forever. The reaction is swift. In America, the public loves it. Nixon looks decisive. He is taking on foreign countries that are taking advantage of America. He is fighting inflation. He is creating jobs. His poll numbers soar. But internationally, the reaction is shock and anger. Allied governments were not consulted. They learned about it from watching television like everyone else. The French are furious. The Germans are furious. The Japanese are furious. This is unilateralism. This is America breaking the rules it created and imposed on everyone else. Currency markets go haywire. Nobody knows what exchange rates should be anymore. The fixed parities are dead, but floating rates have not been established. Countries intervene desperately to manage their currencies. Some close their markets entirely. It is chaos. Over the next 4 months, Connolly uses the import surcharge as a club. He travels the world, negotiating, or rather, demanding. He tells countries they need to revalue their currencies. He tells them American competitiveness comes first. He is abrasive. He is aggressive. He does not care if he offends anyone. In December 1971, the group of 10 industrialized nations meet at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. They hammer out a compromise. The dollar is officially devalued to $38 per ounce of gold. Other currencies revalue upward against the dollar. Japan agrees to let the yen appreciate by about 17%. Germany lets the mark appreciate by about 14%. New fixed exchange rates are established. Nixon calls it the most significant monetary agreement in the history of the world. It lasts 15 months. By February 1973, currency speculation forces another devaluation of the dollar. This time to $42 per ounce of gold. Not that it matters, because the gold window is still closed. You still cannot actually buy gold at that price. In March 1973, the major currencies abandon fixed rates entirely. They float. The market decides their value, not governments. The Bretton Woods system is officially dead. What Nixon called temporary in August 1971 becomes permanent by March 1973, and the world enters a new era, the era of fiat money. Money backed by nothing except trust. Nothing except the government's promise that it is worth something. Nothing except faith. So what really happened? History books say Nixon closed the gold window because the United States ran out of gold. But that is not just incomplete. It misses the deeper truth. Here is what actually happened. The United States did not run out of gold. In August 1971, America still had about 10,000 tons of gold. That is a lot of gold. More than any other country. But America had created about $40 billion that foreign central banks could theoretically redeem. At $35 per ounce, 10,000 tons of gold is worth about $11 billion. The coverage ratio was 25%. That is not zero. But it is not enough if everyone asks for redemption at once. The problem was not running out. The problem was the commitment had become impossible to keep. Let me break this down. Step 1 was the post-war recovery. Europe and Japan rebuilt. They started exporting. Dollars flowed out of America to pay for imports. This was necessary. The world needed dollars. Step 2 was Cold War spending. Military bases around the world. Foreign aid. The arms race. More dollars flowing out. Step 3 was the Vietnam War and the Great Society. Massive deficit spending. Loose monetary policy. Inflation. Even more dollars created. Step 4 was other countries becoming competitive. German and Japanese goods getting better and cheaper. American trade deficits growing, the dollars piling up faster. Step 5 was the Trifon dilemma manifesting. The world needed dollars for trade. But the more dollars America created, the less gold backed each one. This was not sustainable. Step 6 was confidence breaking. Countries seeing the math, starting to ask for gold instead of holding dollars. The slow bank run beginning. Step 7 was the political decision. Nixon choosing to break the promise rather than defend it. Closing the gold window to preserve American power and flexibility. Think of it like this. You promise to exchange IOUs for gold. Everyone wants your IOUs because they trust the promise. You write more IOUs than you have gold. As long as nobody asks for redemption, the system works. But the moment people start asking, you have two choices. Defend the promise by raising the price of gold and making your IOUs worth less, or break the promise and declare your IOUs are now just paper you promised to honor. Nixon chose the second option, but here is what nobody talks about. The people who made money in this transition were not the ones holding dollars or gold. They were the people who understood the incentive structures. Countries that revalued their currencies early, like Germany, protected their wealth. Countries that held onto dollar reserves and did not diversify, like many developing nations, lost purchasing power. Oil-producing countries that saw their dollar revenues lose value formed OPEC and jacked up oil prices to compensate, creating the oil shocks of the 1970s. Financial institutions that understood floating currencies created new derivative markets, currency, futures, foreign exchange trading, a whole new industry built on volatility. The system was designed to privilege the United States. America could print the global reserve currency. America could run trade deficits and just export more dollars. America could finance its government spending by selling bonds that other countries had to buy to hold reserves. The exorbitant privilege, as the French called it. Closing the gold window preserved that privilege. It removed the one constraint, the one accountability mechanism. Now America could print as much as it wanted, as long as other countries still wanted dollars. Now let me show you the pattern. This is the reserve currency trap. It happens every time a nation's currency becomes the global standard. First, the anchoring. The currency is tied to something real. Gold, in this case. This creates trust. Second, the expansion. The world needs more currency to grow. The issuing nation creates more. This seems to work. Third, the overextension. The issuing nation spends beyond its means. Wars, domestic programs, trade deficits, the currency floods the world. Fourth, the mathematical impossibility. The backing no longer covers the obligations. The promise becomes a fiction. Fifth, the confidence crisis. Holders of the currency realize the problem. They start to exit, slowly at first, then faster. Sixth, the choice. The issuing nation can defend the old system and accept pain, or break the promise and maintain power. Seventh, the new system. Whatever comes next redistributes power. Sometimes the old reserve currency survives in a new form. Sometimes it gets replaced. This pattern repeated with the British pound before the dollar. It repeated with gold standard collapses before Bretton Woods. And it is starting to show signs of repeating now. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now let us talk about 2026. Right now, the United States dollar is still the global reserve currency. Nothing has replaced it. Despite 50 years of predictions of dollar collapse, the dollar remains dominant. About 60% of global foreign exchange reserves are dollars. About 90% of foreign exchange transactions involve dollars. Oil is still priced in dollars. But there are cracks. Sound familiar? Let us run through the checklist. The anchoring. The dollar is not anchored to gold anymore. It is anchored to being the global reserve currency. That is circular logic. The dollar is valuable because everyone uses it. Everyone uses it because it is valuable. Second, the expansion. Check. The United States has printed enormous amounts of dollars, especially since 2008. Quantitative easing, COVID stimulus. The money supply has exploded. Third, the overextension. Check. America runs persistent trade deficits. The government debt is over $36 trillion. The deficit for fiscal year 2024 was about $1.8 trillion. America imports more than it exports. It borrows more than it saves. Fourth, the mathematical impossibility. This is where it gets interesting. There is no gold backing to measure against. But there is debt. The US government owes about $36 trillion. The interest payments alone are approaching $900 billion per year. At some point, this becomes unsustainable without printing more money, which causes inflation, which erodes trust. Fifth, the confidence crisis. Check. In slow motion. China is reducing dollar reserves and accumulating gold. Russia has largely de-dollarized since sanctions. BRICS nations are discussing alternative payment systems. The Saudi oil deals that require dollar usage are weakening. Slowly, gradually, some countries are diversifying away. Sixth, the choice. We are not at this point yet, but the choice will come. Defend the dollar's value by cutting spending and raising rates. Or defend American flexibility by accepting higher inflation and currency depreciation. Seventh, the new system. This is the unknown. Will the dollar remain dominant but share power with the yuan, the euro, maybe digital currencies? Will a truly new system emerge, or will there be fragmentation, different economic blocs using different currencies? Now, is this exactly like 1971? No. The world is different. Technology is different. The level of interconnection is different. The United States still has enormous advantages. The deepest financial markets, the most innovative economy, the global reserve currency status creates network effects that are hard to overcome, military power that backs up economic power. We also have learned some lessons. Central banks coordinate better. We have institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. We understand more about managing currency crises. The Federal Reserve can respond faster and more flexibly than under Bretton Woods. But here is what history teaches. The pattern does not need to be identical to be relevant. When a reserve currency nation overspends for too long, when deficits accumulate too high, when trust starts to erode, the mathematics eventually matter. The constraint might not be gold, but there are always constraints. What should you watch for? First, watch the dollar's share of global reserves. If it drops consistently below 50%, that is significant. It is at about 60% now. Second, watch major countries' actions, not their words. Are they accumulating gold? Are they creating alternative payment systems? Are they reducing dollar bond holdings? Third, watch your debt and deficits. If debt service costs become one of the largest budget items, if deficits consistently exceed 5% of GDP, the math starts to look unsustainable. Fourth, watch inflation and interest rates. The Federal Reserve faces the same dilemma Nixon faced. Keep rates low to help the economy and government finances, or raise them to preserve dollar value. You cannot do both forever. Fifth, watch international monetary discussions. If serious proposals for a new global currency system emerge, if the IMF's special drawing rights gain traction, if bilateral currency swaps proliferate outside the dollar, these are signs. I am not predicting the dollar will collapse. I am showing you the historical pattern. What you do with that information is up to you. So why do we keep falling into this trap? Because the reserve currency privilege is irresistible. When your money is the global money, you can borrow cheaply. You can run deficits that other countries cannot. You can export your inflation. You can use financial sanctions as a weapon. It feels like power, and it is power. The temptation is to use that power. Spend on domestic programs. Fund foreign interventions. Maintain military bases everywhere. Buy more than you produce. For decades, this seems to work. The bills get paid in your own currency. Other countries accept it because they need it for trade. But slowly, gradually, the accumulation of obligations grows. The deficits pile up. The debt increases. The printing presses run faster, and at some point, the people accepting your currency start to wonder, what is this actually worth? What backs this promise? The answer used to be gold. Then it was America's industrial might. Then it was military dominance and the petrodollar system. Now it is increasingly just inertia. Just the fact that the dollar is the global currency. So it stays the global currency, until it does not. We also keep falling into this trap because the costs are delayed. Nixon got re-elected in 1972 in a landslide. Closing the gold window did not hurt him politically. Americans liked it. They thought he was standing up for America. The costs came later. The inflation of the 1970s. The oil shocks. The crisis that required Paul Volcker to raise interest rates to 20% in the early 1980s to restore dollar credibility. By then, Nixon was gone, disgraced by Watergate. The people who made the decisions in 1971 did not pay the price for those decisions. The next generation did. This is the political economy problem. Leaders respond to incentives. If breaking promises helps you stay in power, and someone else pays the price later, the temptation is overwhelming. Every generation thinks it can manage the transition better than the previous one. Every generation thinks the rules do not apply to them. Every generation learns too late. But here is what the story of 1971 really teaches us. The collapse of Bretton Woods was not a disaster. The world did not end. In fact, in many ways the new system worked better. Floating exchange rates allowed for more flexibility. Countries could pursue independent monetary policies. Trade continued to grow. The global economy expanded enormously over the next 50 years. Yes, there was inflation in the 1970s. Yes, there were currency crises. But there was also growth, innovation, wealth creation on an unprecedented scale. The lesson is not that fiat money is bad. The lesson is that every monetary system eventually reaches its limits. Bretton Woods lasted 27 years. The classical gold standard before World War I lasted about 40 years. The current dollar system has lasted 50 years. Nothing is permanent. The question is not whether the system will change. The question is how it will change. Will it be a managed transition or a chaotic collapse? Will it preserve international cooperation or splinter into competing blocs? Will the United States lead the change or resist it until forced? These are the real questions. Nixon understood something important. When a system is breaking down, trying to preserve it as is often fails. Sometimes you have to break it yourself and shape what comes next. He did that. The gold standard was dying. He killed it. And in the chaos that followed, American negotiators shaped the new system to preserve as much American power as possible. The dollar remained the global reserve currency. The Federal Reserve gained more policy flexibility. America kept the exorbitant privilege. Whether the current system faces a similar moment, we will see, but the pattern suggests these transitions happen. They are not smooth, they are not predictable, but they happen. Understanding this does not give you a crystal ball. You cannot predict the timing, you cannot control what policymakers decide. But you can recognize the dynamics. You can see when the mathematics stop working. You can prepare for the possibility that the rules might change. When leaders tell you something is temporary, remember 1971, when governments promise their currency is as good as gold. Remember what happened to that promise. When debt grows faster than the economy, remember the Triffin dilemma. The constraints always matter eventually. They can be delayed, they can be managed, but they cannot be eliminated. You cannot print your way to permanent prosperity. You cannot borrow forever without consequences. You cannot break promises without eroding trust. These are not moral judgments, these are mathematical realities. The real lesson is this. The collapse of Bretton Woods was not about gold. Gold was just a measuring stick. It was about trust, about promises, about the gap between obligations and the ability to meet them. Today, we do not measure dollar obligations against gold. We measure them against the productive capacity of the American economy, against the willingness of other nations to keep accepting dollars, against the credibility of American institutions. These are harder to quantify than gold reserves, but they are just as real, and just as limited. The world Nixon created in 1971 is still our world. A world where money is trust, where currency values float, where America can print the global reserve currency, where international monetary cooperation is voluntary, not enforced by fixed rules. This system has advantages: flexibility, resilience to different kinds of shocks, the ability to respond to crises without being constrained by arbitrary gold reserves. But it also has vulnerabilities: the temptation to overuse the printing press, the risk that trust erodes, the possibility that the reserve currency privilege becomes a reserve currency trap. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the dollar will remain the global reserve currency for the next 50 years? What could replace it? What am I missing in this analysis? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The best insights often come from you, not me. If this changed how you see money and what backs it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories that connect historical decisions to the economic realities you live in today. Next time, we are diving into the Volcker shock of the early 1980s, when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates so high it broke the economy to save the dollar. Another crisis, another choice, another pattern worth understanding. Remember, every monetary system eventually reaches its limits. The question is always what comes next. See you in the next one.